This is Keys to the Shop, episode 381, Changing the Way We Think About Tea, with the founder of Volition Tea, Annie Xiang. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I'm your host for the show, and I'm always happy to have you along here, and I would really encourage you to subscribe to Keys to the Shop. All you'd have to do is hit subscribe. It's as easy as that. Just wherever you're listening to the show right now, just hit that button. That gives us a great idea of who's listening to the show, and helps the show up in the rankings and all of that fun stuff, so more people can find great conversations like today's. And I really thank you for doing that. Also sharing the episodes on your social channels like Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever, or just face-to-face with people. That'd be great. And let people know about the resources that Keys to the Shop brings to the specialty coffee retail community. Now, Keys to the Shop, on top of doing this podcast, also offers consulting and coaching for you and your business, your management team. There's a lot of ways we can work together through either on-site assessment of your cafe and coaching, or just straight up coaching and consultation over the phone to help you level up your operations, quality, people, increase profitability, gain clarity, and build systems to help you thrive as a coffee retailer. If that sounds interesting to you and you want to work one-on-one with me through any problems, challenges, or projects that you have going on right now, then I would encourage you to reach out to chris@keystotheshop.com, and then we'll set up a free discovery call. We'll talk all about what you've got going on and how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. You know, one of the great things about coffee is the story behind coffee. And a lot of that story can be experienced with the flavor. And you want to make sure that when you're brewing coffee in your coffee shop, you're doing so the best that you possibly can. That's why I'm so excited about the Ground Control Cyclops brewer from Voga Coffee. Their SCA award-winning technology allows you to extract an incredible range of flavors from the coffee consistently that other technologies were just not able to do until now. And that means your customers get the full spectrum of what your coffee has to offer. It really is a game changer. And it's not only a batch brewer, but it also makes tea, batch diced lattes, batch cold brew. And so you should check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee to learn more about this amazing piece of equipment. If you're looking to really upgrade your quality, your workflow and efficiency, and just look amazing doing it, then you definitely need to be thinking about getting a Ground Control Cyclops brewer in your store. Go visit them again over at groundcontrol.coffee. There's an incredible variety of beverages that we serve on the bar every day. One of the main staples of a coffee bar these days is having an assortment of plant-based beverages. And when you offer your customers that, they expect that it's going to be high quality, and that's why choosing the right ingredients is so important. And one of the best decisions you can make is to use the Barista Series from Pacific. The Barista Series is a line of plant-based performance beverages. It's designed specifically for baristas and tested by baristas around the world to make sure that it does actually perform like you would expect something called a performance beverage would. It stands up to the heat from steaming, produces awesome texture, and keeps the balance of the beverage's flavor focused on the coffee. Go to pacificfoodservice.com and get samples in your store to try it for yourself. I really think you're going to be impressed. If you want to serve your customers the best plant-based beverages out there, then I think it needs to be the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today we're going to be talking with the founder of Volition Tea, Annie Xiang. Not too long ago, Annie left the corporate world to start the tea company Volition Tea as a way to center the conversation around tea on the tea farmers and their stories. Every decision they make centers around serving the community of farmers. And instead of focusing on transparency and direct trade for the sake of marketing, Volition shares the stories of tea farmers to cultivate empathy across communities. She does a lot of education in the coffee world on tea, energizing coffee retailers and baristas with these stories, with these wonderful teas that have been curated at Volition. In this conversation today, we're going to be talking about how she came to this revelation of how she should form this company, Volition, and what has gone into forming the foundation and values of that company, where she feels we need to go when it comes to our perception in the coffee industry on tea. We talk about the different types of teas there are, ways to energize staff around tea. So it's not just a product on the peripheral, but it can also be a focus that is crafted just like your coffee. And we talk about how to create a great tea menu in your coffee shop, as well as many other things. So without further ado, let's get right to the conversation. Here now is my interview with the founder of Volition Tea, Annie Xiang. Well, Annie, welcome to Keys to the Shop. Such a pleasure to have you on the show. How's it going?
Thank you so much, Chris, for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, this is one of those things where, uh, when we talk about tea in the coffee shop, I think it's often as a secondary item. And I know the passion that you have for tea, and this is something that um, we get to see. I've gotten to see you at Coffee Fest at least a couple of times, I believe, that, with Volition Tea. And it's a relatively new company, right? How long have you been in operation now?
So I quit my job last year, September 2021, and a month later, I launched Volition Tea. So October 2021, we just celebrated our 1 year anniversary.
Oh, wow. Congrats. Okay. So
Thank
pretty
you. It's
fresh,
very
pretty
exciting.
fresh. Yeah. And so,
Absolutely, we're still a babe.
but you're not a stranger to tea. That's the thing. So this is a passion project turned business, and I want to kind of ask you to take us on that journey when you first, became fascinated with tea, how it was, something that was more than just a drink to you, and then what led you to say, you know what, I've got to found my own tea company.
I'm first generation Chinese American, so like many Asians, I grew up drinking tea with my family, with my friends. Tea has always been just a beverage for me, perhaps a collective beverage because all of my memories of drinking tea are sitting at a table with friends, with family, enjoying endless sessions of tea, talking about life, talking about things that are joyous in our life. Tea really became more than a beverage. When I'm reflecting on your question, when I stumbled upon an Instagram post by a really respectable tea purveyor outside of US. I remember it was during spring harvest time, and they said that they tried this year's harvest from this tea farmer that they've been working with for many years, and they realized that this year's production flavor profile was not up to the standard that they have set for this tea, which is a testament that they must continuously sourcing from different farmers in order to provide the best quality of teas to their patrons. I remember really being taken aback because on paper everything they mentioned is correct. That's as a business, that's what you're supposed to do. But perhaps as a first generation Chinese American, I immediately sensed this clear imbalance of power between the tea purveyor and the tea farmer. From the farmer perspective, they've been working with this tea purveyor for many years. So reasonably, they would assume that this tea purveyor would be there at the end of the harvest, purchasing this new lot. Yet they're not, and it was really disheartening for me to have that realization. And that's when it first made me realize that tea is more than a beverage to me because I have this deep and invisible connection to tea and treating tea and seeing there's so much humanity behind tea than what other tea purveyors or even tea drinkers have seen. So that's when a seed has planted in my head that maybe there's something that I can do about that. So before I started Volition, I was actually an international tax manager at one of the big four accounting firms. So it's quite a different pivot, quite a large pivot. Um, I it really started when I went back to work after maternity leave, and I remember reading this Dr. Seuss book to my son during bedtime, and one of the last pages of the book says, "The world is a great place to begin, but it could use some help, which is where you come in." And it really hit me hard. I've,
Mm.
I've read that page a dozen times to him, But it was after going back to work that it really hit me hard and made me realize, though I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom taking care of him and using 100% of my time to do that, when I am away from him doing work, I want to be able to find something that's so meaningful to me, whether that's helping my community, contributing in some way to make this world a better place, so that it makes me feel good to be away from him. So that's when I started looking, what can I do? It also coincided, if you look at the timeline that I briefly mentioned before, it coincided with the entire pandemic and when the hate crimes against my community was catching national
Mm-hmm.
spotlight. It has always existed, but it was only catching national spotlight at that point. And through conversations with others and also through raising my son, I realized that empathy is not a born trait. Empathy is a learned trait. So if you didn't grow up with people who look like us, you didn't hear the struggles, the hardship, the joy that we lived through, it is hard to empathize. But yet our stories are so rarely told by a vast number of reasons. So when I looked at tea in that moment when I stumbled upon that Instagram post, it all just clicked in me that, when I look at the coffee world, it's a collective production, right? It's a collective effort by the cherry farmers and the local roasters to make a consumable product. Yet in tea, 100% of the work is done by tea farmers. They did 100% of the growing, caring, harvesting, processing. Tea purveyors are really just bringing that finished product to more people. Yet the tea world has done so little to nothing in shining a light on the humanity behind this product. Comparatively in the coffee world, and I used to, because of the work that I did for 6 years, I worked so long hours that I needed the caffeine, so I became really addicted to coffee. But I also I feel that experience is very great for me because I got to see the wealth of information that the coffee industry is able to share with the world. Anything from the origin, the tea farmer, the processing method, and minimum each bag of coffee has a roasting date on there. So you know exactly how fresh your coffee beans are. When was the last time you or anyone know anything about the tea that you consume? That's the revelation that I had that prompted me to start thinking about having my own tea business.
It's amazing to consider just the way that you were talking about how all of it is on the tea farmer, the desire to share the stories of those farmers that don't get told the same way that the coffee farmers. The infrastructure is just not. It doesn't seem built, and it seems like this is one of the cornerstones of your business. And so, take us into how you decided to take the first step into doing this, even though this was a meaningful beverage to you. Your profession wasn't in it, and so how did you determine, okay, this is how I'm going to make a difference as you started to plan Volition?
Absolutely. So I really leaned hard specifically to this very podcast, Keys to the Shop. It's not even an on-fund compliment. If you ask my partner, he actually introduced Keys to the Shop to me by sharing one episode.
Oh,
And a
fun.
day later, I probably listened to 20 episodes, and I was just sending him left and right these incredible episodes that you were able to produce with the very important and great people in the coffee world. I really leaned heavily on the coffee world to give me kind of a stewardship on how I wanted to create Volition Tea. One thing that became really apparent to me is this concept of transparency. We all collectively recognize the importance of transparency And it's a great, to be honest, it's a great marketing tactic, right? When you're able to share so much information, people feel more secure and more safe and want to rely on your product in your company more. But I found myself asking, why do we do transparency? I looked at some of the current competitors in the tea world, and they do a lot of transparency too. They will say that this tea is produced by Mr. Yang in this year. And I remember sitting across from my screen just laughing because there's probably 100 million people whose last name is Yang.
Mm.
That type of transparency is so meaningless, yet if that's all that you know as a tea drinker, you feel like that's a much of a big step ahead of the rest of the tea brands that you see in grocery stores, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to, really reflect on what do I want to accomplish by having transparency. And I realized that if my purpose is to tell the stories of the farmers, I really want to be able to help them reach the physical sustainability that can guarantee that they can continue to grow sustainably. That means that if I have to not only tell you who exactly made your tea in their full name, when it was made to the date, and where it was made down to the village, as a fellow tea purveyor, if they tried our tea and really enjoyed it, they could find this farmer, and that's okay. The open sharing of the sources is really important to me, and that's what I consider true transparency, because ultimately this transparency results in you bringing more business to the farmers.
Mm.
If others outbid me, that's great for the farmers, right? It's bad for me because I don't get to, purchase this tea for my tea drinkers. But ultimately, that's great for the farmers because they get to sell more of their teas at hopefully better price and can reach more people around the world. And that's how I wanted to position Valencian tea in terms of transparency. And that's what's I consider the most important thing for us.
That is a very interesting dilemma there with businesses that grow and they want to have some exclusivity. And ideally, you started with a story about the tea purveyor who kind of pulled the rug out from underneath the tea farmer. And how that story illustrates that it's all sunshine and rainbows until business kind of rears its head, right? And so it's a unique business model to say it's good that I lose business, and it's an oversimplification of what you're saying, but it's in a sense it's a very big challenge. But we use these marketing terms to engender confidence in the consumer that we have the person's best interest at heart, and it's hard to tell if that's genuine or not, right? So when you go to coffee shops and you sell them on your tea, on your idea, on just this new paradigm of maybe just even taking tea a little bit more seriously, but not only that, but taking the people behind the tea more seriously, how does that conversation usually go?
That's a great question. It often starts with, we just don't believe there's a tea market out there. And I think that's a sentiment that's shared by many of your listeners, by coffee shops in general, that they really haven't seen a tea market that they are able to tap into. So the first thing that I always talk about is that it's really a chicken or egg first problem. Because until you have better tea program and better quality tea, you never know what market that you're not tapped into. As a day-to-day tea drinker, I rarely go to a coffee shop to order tea because I know that what I have at home is better than what they can provide me in the coffee shop. Whether, all the way from storing tea, a lot of places love to showcase their teas in glass jars. And it gives me a headache every time I see that because for so much green tea in a glass jar, you're just letting them oxidize and they will just become stale. And it's even less appealing to me to look at that and wanting to order a cup of tea. So until you have better tea program, you really don't know, as I mentioned, the tea market that's really out there, especially once the pandemic started, people are working from home. A lot of people realize that, oh, maybe I don't need that much caffeine in a day. And maybe they would do a coffee in the morning and then a tea in the afternoon. There are a lot of recent converts from coffee to tea. This is definitely something that coffee shops can tap into with the help of tea purveyors, all the way from tea training to really get your baristas on board, right? I imagine that's also a story that's shared by many listeners, that even though you as the owner want to do the right thing, want to have the same quality in tea as in coffee, your baristas are just not on board because it's so complicated, it takes a long time, you have to clean the teapot, it's just too much work. What I found out is once I start a tea training, and interestingly, with this dilemma that you just mentioned, Chris, that it's really serving me well, and it's serving the coffee shop owners well too, because I come from a point of storytelling. When I am doing the tea training with baristas, we're not only just tasting teas, I'm telling them about these farmers, I'm telling them about Yang Xiuhai, who quit his corporate job in 2013 in Beijing and flew into the mountains of Yunnan to learn how to become a tea farmer. That's a story that we can all resonate with, right? In this great resignation era. And that's a story that's never been told to the baristas. So they personally felt invested in the process and they want to make it right. And they try the tea. It's delicious, it's innovative, it's experimental, and they want to share all of that stories with their patrons. And I think you just need to give the benefit of the doubt and really talk to your tea purveyor and see what tea training and what literature that they can provide you in order to provide a better tea program to really tap into the tea market that's there and waiting for you to discover them.
There are people, like you said, they're latent. There's this latent group of people that will drink tea, and especially maybe just waiting for you to offer it in a particular way. And we often wait for people to demand things before we'll put them in the shop. And what I hear you saying is that maybe there's some, like you say, experiment with what you've got in order to see what's out there in terms of untapped potential in your customer base, because they might not come up to you and say, I want this particular type of tea. But if you had it and you offered it, then they might in fact become a really big fan of it, and it might set you apart.
Absolutely. We had feedback from patrons in many coffee shops where day after day, week after week, month after month, they order the same tea. And once they brought on Volition and really promoted it, not just in the shop, but also in social media about this new tea program and about the different teas, they were really excited to try every single one that's on that list and discover a new favorite. And I think that's where it's really important for coffee shop owners and managers to not just present your teas as white, green, black. Because when you do that, people have a perceived notion of what a flavor profile and whether they and their preference on a typical white tea, a typical green tea, and a typical black tea. But your actual selection can be quite different than what they're used to. But they will never touch it because it's only seen as black or only seen as green. Take green tea as an example. Most people don't touch green tea if they knew growing up they hated the Lipton green tea, right? Because it's so vegetal, it's so bitter, I hate it. Why would I ever order and waste my money for a cup of green tea? But with our coffee shop partners who present the green tea option as high mountain dragon well and then showcase the flavor profile, sugarcane, chestnut, savory. People are like, whoa, like I don't associate those flavor profiles to a green tea, so maybe
Hmm.
I should give it a try. And they really discover a favorite. It really changed, turned a corner for them in terms of their perception on what a particular tea tastes like.
And one of the things that you mentioned is that, green, black, white, red, we're just going to break it down by these color swaths of tea. And you'll often see not only the glass jars, but in a pretty large menu of teas. There's about 17 different options, and there's always that one jar that's just never used. Um, at least that's been my experience. So I know that you're an advocate for a bit more of a pared down menu of teas, and the anxiety I think that people might have around this is maybe the same as what they have around syrup selection, right? They think, well, we want to have something for everybody, and what if somebody comes in and they want something weird like this, that, and the other thing, and tea never goes bad, so let's just like put it in the jar, and we know that that's not exactly the case, but I feel like that's maybe the psychology behind it. But talk a little bit more about why you're an advocate for a more pared down tea menu in coffee shops.
Absolutely. Again, from a consumer perspective, I always get decision paralysis when I'm looking at a large menu.
Mm,
I can recount so many times where I walk into a coffee shop, I'm ready to order a cup of tea, and then I see the gigantic menu and could not decide what to order. And I ended up ordering a latte because I know what that tastes like. Um, so I think that having a small menu is so important because there are several reasons. One, it helps with that decision paralysis on the customer end. Second, it really helps your barista too, especially if you are going to brew tea loose leaf style. It's really important for them to not have a really large, voluminous recipe book for how to brew each of the tea, right? That's just building more resistance than you really need to get them on board to do what you consider is the right thing. Having a small menu, they will be very accustomed to the several teas, how they should be brewed at different temperature if your equipment allows, but for different time. And you can have set timers that you can implement for those few teas that you have so that they don't have to do this timer manually over and over again every time somebody orders a cup of this tea. It also really helps with getting your menu excited. If you wanted to change things up, if you want it to be exciting for customers, and if you comparatively have a coffee menu where there are a couple items that you rotate and you bring out new products seasonally, you can do the same with tea. A lot of teas are seasonally too. For example, our Big Red Robe, even though it's harvested in May, it goes through 3-time charcoal roasting. I believe, Chris, you've had that. It's an
yes.
incredible, sweet, juicy, smoky teas. Um, they because they go through 3-time charcoal roasting, it's not ready until August and September, which is the perfect time because it's so warming, yet on a nice summer day, you can still do it cold brewed and it's very delicious. So you can do that seasonally. You can have a few staples, a green tea, a red tea, what's known as black tea here in the West. Chinese has always called it red. You can have a stable green, you can have a stable red, and then just have the third one on rotation, and then add in an herbal. I think that keeps people really excited, and most of the tea purveyors have more than a few options for you to be able to do that rotation. The problem, I think, and you alluded to that, Chris, is that one or a couple of teas that never sell, that are just sitting there. I think that's one of the biggest problems that I discovered as I approached coffee shop owners, is that there's really no taking in the shop owner's interest when negotiating and forming the transaction between the tea purveyor and the coffee shop owner. It seemed like it's just, how can I sell you with the biggest bulk of tea that you are willing to
Right,
take,
right.
and it's now your problem. You got to deal with how to go through them. I've met so many coffee shop owners who have this one tea that they've been trying to go through in a mocktail form, in a cocktail at an event form, or as a syrup in a coffee form, just trying to get through it. But it's so hard because they bought such a big bulk. So I not only recommend you have a small menu, I recommend that you don't buy too much at a time. You buy based on your data, and that same way goes with trimming down the menu. I think, Chris, you had an episode on this, is eliminating menu items humanely, right? To do it slowly, and based on your data, what is truly not selling? I feel like there are a lot of sentimental values that we put on a certain product that we don't believe that we should be taking it away. But if you look at data, it's probably really clear that you can keep it on your shelf for 2 more years, but it's just not going to sell, and it's just taking up more space.
That's so true. Yeah, you got to decide what teas spark joy, honestly.
Absolutely.
Yes. And that conversation that you were referring to between a purveyor and a retailer, that's really interesting, because if you were a roaster and you had people hanging on to your coffees for an extreme amount of time, and they were developing somewhat of a grudge against your coffee because it was just like not selling, they would probably throw it away after a little bit. We don't do that with tea. It just kind of hangs out and develops a patina or whatever. But that kind of, it feels like the tide is changing with companies like yours, where it is a matter of relationship building between the purveyor and the retailer rather than a commodity exchange.
Absolutely. And I am so glad that the tide is changing and we're going towards that direction, because if we continuously treat tea as a commodity item, we will soon no longer have tea farmers who are willing to grow, care, harvest, and process teas for us. Climate change has really shown its harshest light on farmers, and I know that this is resonated in the coffee world as well. Give you one example, we have this white tea called Colorful Peony. It's a 4-year aged white tea. It's insanely beautiful. It's so floral, honey, with a minty aftertaste, all just within the leaves. There's no additive, no blending. They did it in 2018, intentionally aged it for 2 years, and sold the rest of the harvest to us. And we're running so low, we were hoping that we will have a new colorful peony from this year. But every year since 2018, they've been trying to reproduce this tea without success, because it's either the climate change causing drought, which makes the leaves too brittle for the shaking craft that they wanted it to introduce to this particular experimental white tea, or there's extreme flooding, which really diluted the tea, which diluted the flavor compounds within the tea leaves, and just creating a suboptimal result that the farmers are not happy with. These are real costs, and they are taking it like a champ, but they shouldn't be, because we are all in this together, right? From the farmer, from the exporter, importer, tea purveyors, and tea drinkers, we're all in this together. Without the tea farmers, we're not going to be able to enjoy this product that we love so much. So how can we make sure that they can continuously doing this, that they know is the right thing to do and we know is the right thing to do, is to ensure that they have the physical sustainability, to ensure that they are paid well. With us, we don't negotiate with farmers at all. It's whatever price that they wanted to charge, that's competitively against the domestic market in China and abroad. As long as we are willing and we have the budget for it, we don't negotiate, we pay that price, so that they can have the extra that needed on a hard time, like this colorful peony. Another tea that we had is raw jade, which is it's a light roast oolong produced by a woman farmer, which is relatively rare in the tea making world. She spent 10 years cultivating a bare mountain into an organic tea garden of her dream, and she finally produced this classic tea called Shuixian or orchid. She loved it so much she named it after herself. Her name is Zhen Pu Yu. Pu Yu means raw jade in Chinese. So total woman boss energy. Love sharing that story. There's no 2022 raw jade that we get to share, and they get to share with anyone because they decided to forgo pesticides. All of our farmers that Volition works with forgo any pesticide usage, and they only use organic or homemade fertilizers. Because they decided to forgo pesticide usage, they sign up for the high risk that their crop can be wiped out by pest, and they have to find creative methods to deter that. But they decided on a harvest day, and they went in and realized that much of the crop was bug bitten. They proceeded with tea making, but the end result was just not great. So Pu Yu herself decided that she is not making any raw jade this year, and she did not do a broadcast of this tragedy. She just took it as, I signed up for this. On day one, I decided to do an organic tea garden, and that's just the risk that I was and have been willing to take. But for how long, right? How long can they continuously doing this without being compensated and helped in some way by everybody else within the supply chain? What we did this year was they had some residual stock of 2021. We bought it at the same price, even though it's 1 year old, so that they can have some capital to reinvest and care for their plants and be ready for next year's harvest. These stories need to be told, and I feel like that's part of the package of moving a product from commodity to a specialty item so that people can see more beyond just the product in front of you and be an active part of the supply chain on how to make this entire thing more sustainable.
When you go out to source teas and you're deciding on what you want to carry for Volition, what is the framework you use to determine the range of products that you bring in and offer to your customers?
Yeah, so there are 6 types of teas in China, 6 families. You have white, yellow, green, oolong, red. Red is what's known as black in the West, and the Chinese black tea. Adding Tissan, which we would largely consider it as the 7th. That is the framework that I use to decide what to source and try to have a balance of each of the category. The only category that we don't have right now is the yellow tea. Yellow tea is kind of the it tea right now in China. There are a lot of counterfeit because it's so popular. It's at an atrocious amount of money. So we don't have that right now, but we have everyone else in the families of tea. In terms of specifically, I look for a tea that's, as I alluded to earlier, sustainably grown. That means the farmers completely forgo any pesticide usage, and we actually test each tea to make sure that there is no pesticide residue at all. This is the agreement that we have set with our exporter because even though I drank tea growing up, I'm not in a tea family business. I don't know anything about the tea industry really before starting Volition Tea. So I do rely on my tea exporter, Daniel Hong, to help me source these teas. And the agreement is that if a tea comes back with pesticide residue, then it will be sent back and I will be compensated for the loss. And it's just really, really great that I was able to find a tea exporter that really tapped into that market because at launch, 7 out of 8 teas that we sourced are completely clean. So only
Wow.
1 out of 8 that came back with pesticide residue, and he was able just to take it in and help me source a different tea. I consider that a huge victory given how little I know. And I know from talking to farmers that it is incredibly difficult to really completely forgo pesticide usage. It's just not, the incentives aren't aligned, right? If you are forgoing pesticide usage, then you are signing up for a lower yield. Yet you are okay with that only because you have mad respect for the land and for the people that live on it, for the generations that are coming. So it's really important that we source as Volition from these farmers and got to tell that story. And the only way that I could tell that story is if I can meet these farmers in person, and I'm doing air quotes because I started Volition in the pandemic and I wasn't able to go back with the extended quarantine period that China imposes on visitors. But the tea exporter allowed me to, add their WeChat, add their messenger app, and really converse with them in person, get to know them, exchange, children pictures, saying holiday greetings, really build that intimate personal relationship. So I was able to share their stories. They are able to open up to me, that allows me to share their stories with people. So those are the two main things.
Yeah, that's great. Especially, yeah, like you said, having this network that allows you to successfully source these teas is really wonderful. And the respect for the land and the respect for, just the quality of the product is something that can only be successful if it's, celebrated and reciprocated in the consuming world, where you see people saying, yes, I want to support those farmers by showing the same kind of respect for the tea and being interested in the story and creating this symbiotic relationship. And so it feels like operators need to consider looking at your counters right now and figuring out, how do we level up what we currently have. I guess you might need to take some tea and call it a loss, give it to some of your staff if you want to revamp your menu over time. But there's some different practices that you have to have in place as well. And I know you were an advocate also of re-steeping tea as a means of minimizing waste, but also it's a tea education for operators and for customers. Talk a little bit more about that, because I don't see a whole lot of that going on.
Yes, it's quite an uphill battle that I am actively and happily in, to help convince more coffee shop owners and managers to get on board with re-steeping your tea leaves. When it's high quality loose leaf tea, you can re-steep it many times. With our red tea, red jade, you can re-steep it up to 5 times. That's an incredible way to save your cost, your COGS, and be more sustainable. The tea leaves truly can give so much, and oftentimes it's the second steep that tastes the best. So you are really wasting your tea leaves by brewing it once and tossing them. Now, there is a real perception, the real obstacle in front of coffee shop owners is that um, there's the perception of, oh, what are the wet leaves that are on the counter that you are doing? You're steeping. For me, why do I
Yeah.
get the shorter end of the stick? So it's a lot of education. It definitely starts again from your baristas, getting your baristas on board to be able to have that quick education on, you know, here, let me just brew this for you. This is the second cup, the second steep. It's usually better than the first steep. Give it a try. If you don't like it, happy to brew you a fresh leaves pot of tea. This way, it really brings people to be like, whoa, I didn't know that I can re-steep my tea leaves. And of course, that's a perception because majority of consumers in the West start drinking tea by using tea bags. And because the tea leaves within the tea bags are all crumbed up, the flavor compounds get released immediately during the first steeping, so you never re-steep really your tea bags. But with loose leaf tea, the first steeping, depending on the tea, green tea, the first steep is usually really great, very vibrant, flavorful. But majority of the tea leaves, the first steep is really injecting the water into the leaves so that it can wake up, similar to a blooming process in coffee making. And then it's really the second steep that the flavors really get released and you get the mouthfeel, you get the aftertaste, the aroma, you get all of that in your second and third and even fourth and fifth cup. If you can find a way to work with your baristas to slowly give that education, with the help of your tea purveyor, of course, to really understand the profile of the teas that are on your tea program, to have that education to your patrons and have them try it, have them be marveled at this excitement that they can also at home try to re-steep their leaves. That really helps everybody in the process.
It makes things exciting. It's learning something new, and combined with the stories that we get to tell about the farmers behind the tea. If you're working with a purveyor that has that kind of transparency as you do at Volition, then it's a pretty powerful impact that it has.
Absolutely. And that really helps with, I think, getting on board with brewing loose leaf tea, because a lot of, I imagine, coffee shop owners have looked into bringing in loose leaf teas, but one of the two hurdles is that it's too expensive. So hopefully that re-steeping process will help save that cost. And there are a lot of ways that people have been able to do that. All of our coffee shop partners have been just, either using a whiteboard, or if it's erased marker on their countertop, they can just track how many steeps they have done for each tea. And at the end of the day, you're really using minimal amount of leaves and you've sold many more cups.
Everyone should, experiment for their own coffee shop and figure out a system that works, similar to how we do with coffee. And it's a product that's worth experimenting with to optimize, especially considering the amount of work that the farmer puts in.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has really been an amazing conversation, Annie. I appreciate your work, your heart for what you're doing. And with just 1 year under your belt, you've been able to establish such a great presence, and the values that your company is based on are the kinds of values that I think really resonate with where we want to see things like this go in the industry. So thank you very much for this conversation today and for what you do. Where can people learn more about Volition Tea?
We are in 18 different coffee shops and restaurants within Chicago. We have a Google map on the website, volitiontea.com, where you can find out exactly where we are. We obviously have an e-commerce, volitiontea.com, where you can purchase retail products. There is an intake form on there where you can start the wholesale journey if you would like to, try our teas and listen to some of the stories and see if there is a fit between what you want to do in your coffee shop, in your coffee roasters, when it comes to a brand new tea program that can bring a different experience to your patrons.
Wonderful. Thank you very much again, Annie. It is wonderful tea. I have tasted a few of your teas, and they're just fantastic. So everyone definitely check that out. And again, thanks for being a guest on the show.
Of course, it's all my pleasure.
All right, everybody. Well, I hope that you loved that episode. I so appreciate what Annie is doing to not only bring in and showcase wonderful teas, but especially the stories of the farmers and bringing that added level of transparency that creates the energy needed to support them and do that tea justice in the cafe. So amazing to have her on the show. Thank you again, Annie, for all you do. If you want to learn more about Volition Tea, it's as easy as going to their website, volitiontea.com. And you can also find them on Instagram at Volition Tea Co. And go ahead and follow them there. order some tea for yourself. I'm partial to Big Red Robe these days. Annie's done a great job finding something so special for everyone to enjoy. Again, the website is volitiontea.com. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about today's episode, you can go ahead and email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. It's also where you can reach out for Keys to the Shop consulting and coaching, chris@keystotheshop.com. And, 2023 is coming up very shortly, surprisingly. I feel like this whole year has passed down pretty quickly. But that means a new batch of Coffee Fest trade shows. So Coffee Fest has been a trade show and center for equipping the coffee retail community for 30 years. That is a lot of time, and there is just impossible to really quantify just the kind of influence that their education and community has had. When I say education, I'm talking about free and accessibly priced trainings, workshops, lectures, panel discussions that really equip you with a broad range of topics and knowledge to run a great coffee shop. There's the trade show floor. Obviously, you get to interact with great vendors, find products and services that can help you in your coffee shop. And there's the community. In each of these shows, there's the parties that go on, the throwdowns, just the conversations and the networking is really invaluable. And of course, there's cold brew competition. There's the latte art competition, which I'm a head judge. And I hope to see you there at least one of these shows. There's New York, Louisville, Kentucky, Anaheim, California, and yet to be announced fall show in 2023. You can use the code KEYS, KEYS, to get 50% off your registration. Again, that's KEYS, KEYS, to get 50% off your registration when you go to sign yourself and your team up over at coffeefest.com. And I'll look forward to seeing you there. Again, if you're looking to equip yourself and your staff and get energized and set for success, go to coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our episode today. Thanks everybody for joining me for this wonderful conversation on tea. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.